Support for Lab Out Loud is provided by NSTA, the National Science Teaching Association. Find out more about what NSTA has to offer at nsta.org. You're listening to Lab Out Loud, Science for the Classroom and beyond. And today we're talking to a guest who knows what it feels like to be faced with something that doesn't make sense and unexpected results.
Well, scientists do that. You watch how things take place, and some of the really interesting things is when something doesn't make sense. Then you have to say, well, maybe it doesn't work the way we thought. What kind of framework, what kind of way of thinking about this would have this make sense? That's how scientific discoveries are made. And it's a very intriguing, engaging, and rewarding process.
That's up next on Lab Out Loud, but first I'm your co-host Dale Basler.
And I'm Brian Bartel.
And we're back with another podcast, and I want to remind guests about a previous podcast we did, just given the season. We're still raking leaves and all of that, and we did a pumpkin podcast back a couple weeks ago, and I am still reeling in some of the...
Are you seeing gourds in your dreams?
I am still...
No, it's a pumpkin. It's a gourd. What is it?
I think as we are going to go into season of having pumpkin pie and things like that, that is an episode that is still relevant and will be for year after year after year, because I learned so much about the pumpkin world in that episode. It still flips me upside down.
This podcast haunts your dreams.
It's just
listen why.
I think that moment of like, whoa. When you learn a new thing in science, I love that. I wish I could bottle it. And it's a little bit of what you've been talking about lately. It's kind of been sticking in your mind, which is phenomenon.
Yeah. So obviously this is not a new term for anyone who is implementing the next generation science standards. And so we're going to be looking at trying to talk about phenomena in the next, in the coming episodes. How's that? But here's one that just kind of smacked the world upside the face, actually. Mm-hmm. And it happened as a result of, like you mentioned, an unexpected discovery, something that didn't quite make sense. And as we all know, this is kind of like what happens really in science. It's not like you have an idea and you go looking for it and you try to prove or disprove it. This was something that happened kind of sideways a little bit. And maybe sideways is not the right way of saying it, but it's one of those things that kind of makes you go scratch your head and go, that's interesting. And it led to, I guess, what we would call a Eureka moment.
I think there's an opportunity for them to be very engaging for students too, because it is that out of the norm kind of surprise kind of thing that I feel like could captivate the attention of some students.
Yeah, I really do. I remember some of those myself. And so those are kind of like key pivotal moments in my education, and wanting to learn more about how and why something happened by this kind of like a hook or an idea that made me go, really?
Mm-hmm.
Like
exactly.
whales not, coming from the ocean, but actually coming from land. That was like, whoa, blew my mind.
When did you learn that? Do you remember?
College.
So did I. I know. I remember the diagrams of it, and I was just like, why wasn't I told?
Yeah, exactly.
Those are great feelings, and we have one of those stories today. Our guest is here. He's going to be quite familiar with phenomenon, and let's meet him now.
Well, my name's Oliver Ryder, and I guess you could say that I work on endangered species, especially to learn more about them and to try to conserve them.
So you have a big story that was just released about how condors, the California Condors, reproduce, and actually a surprising finding there. Can you give us a brief overview of that?
Well, normally, an individual bird or a snake or a fish or a mouse, receives starts its life because it has a genetic contribution from a father and a mother. But in very rare instances, there are birds and insects and fishes and reptiles that can start their life and grow up and without having contribution from a father. And that's called parthenogenesis.
Was this known that it could occur with these condors? It's just that you detected it?
Well, it was a big surprise. And in fact, it was the first case for a species of bird where the female was present with a male. They were a breeding pair. And there were 2 chicks that were produced by this recognized but very rare and poorly understood mechanism of reproduction called parthenogenesis.
So, Dr. Ryder, you most likely didn't go into your career or job thinking that you were going to discover parthenogenesis in California condors. Can you describe how you even came to discover this phenomenon?
Well, with my colleagues at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, we were involved in the effort to keep the California condor from going extinct from the very earliest days of intervention with its listing as an endangered species. One of the first things we were asked to do was to figure out which sex an individual condor was, because boy condors look like girl condors, much the way that eagles do or parrots do. And so we did experiments in the lab and developed a method to identify the sex of California condors. And it required a sample of blood. So we started to get blood samples from condors, even that were in the wild, and to identify what sex they were. Later, all of the condors were brought into managed care into 2 zoo facilities. At that point, we knew to save the species, they were going to have to be reproduced. They were going to have to be bred in those zoos. And of course, we wanted to pair a male and a female, but we didn't know which birds were most closely related to each other. It turned out later, when we did a lot more work, that a pair of the condors, 2 of the condors in the wild, were actually a parent and its offspring. So we wouldn't have wanted to pair them together for breeding. So we used a method available at the time called DNA fingerprinting to identify which condors were most closely related to which other condors. And that information was used to pair birds for breeding and to pair the chicks for breeding after they hatched and grew up. So that required us to really develop methods for having a DNA profiling for California condors, in addition to the sex identification test. So DNA profiling is a little bit like the kinds of tests that, people can get to understand what their ancestry is, and if they have, if they have relatives that they, didn't know about, and things like that. And over time, we developed the profiles for all of the condors that were being hatched. And when we looked at that whole data set, we saw that there were 2 cases that were really a surprise to us. It really didn't match up. These were chicks that were hatched in different locations with eggs laid by different females. But the male that the female was with couldn't have been the father. We could tell this by the genetic profiling. He simply couldn't have contributed the genetic information that we could identify in the chick. And in fact, we looked across the whole set of data, and there were no males that could contribute. So we could actually see that there was no male contribution to these eggs. The eggs that produce the chicks.
Sure.
So that's a pretty startling finding. And
what was that like, Dr. Ryder? Was there one person that saw that? Was it a group of people? Did you think you have an error at first?
Well, we wanted to check the data. It was so anomalous, and so that was done. But my longtime colleague, Leona Chemnick, was working on this data set, and she asked me, she said, I'm building this data set up, but there's some really results that I can't understand. And so I said, well, let's talk about it. and but I don't have a lot of time. Why don't you walk with me while I'm going out to my car? And so she started to tell me the strange results, and when she told me the chicks were genetically uniform, they didn't have any variation in the genes that we were measuring and the molecular markers we were looking at, and that's extremely improbable. And he told me that and said that they couldn't have had, there was no evidence of any male genetic contribution. I said, I think you have found evidence that California condors can reproduce parthenogenetically.
So, so you were walking to your car having this kind of like,
it was like a parking lot Eureka moment.
It was a Eureka moment, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. And
and how long ago was that?
Oh, it was years ago. It took us a while to get everything together to publish this paper.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about the timeline? You had mentioned like when this began, and a few years ago. When you have a paper like this that's released, you get the sense that this just happened, but that's not exactly true, right?
We collected all the data and assembled it for publication, and then it took a while to do that because of and COVID intervened. But there were actually other genetic studies that we wanted to do at the same time to look at the genetic basis of genetic disease in California condors and develop a test to identify which individuals were carrying these lethal genes, these deleterious genes, these bad genes, and use that for management. So this report was exciting, but it didn't come out until some years after we actually figured it out.
Yeah. Can we back up and just get a little Condor facts here? Because I'm thinking about the listener out there that maybe some students will be like, okay, what exactly is a condor? Can you give us a kind of some broad brushstrokes about, the condor itself? How is it doing? Like endangered? How many do we have or know of? That kind of thing?
Sure. The condor is a very special bird. It survived from the time of giant mammoths and saber-toothed tigers in North America. And it's the bird with the largest wingspan in North America. The wings are over, from tip to tip of wing, it's over 10 feet. And they are vultures. They belong in the group of birds that are vultures. And they are amazing flyers. With their large wingspan, they can soar on the warming air. These are called thermals. They can circle and gain altitude and get up to many, many thousands of feet and coast to the next thermal. So they can fly hundreds of miles without flapping their wings. And their whole body shape and their behavior is focused on their marvelous efficiency in playing with the wind and using the wind, and to be able to search for their food. They eat dead animals, carrion, and their numbers declined over many, many years.
Why?
Their numbers declined for a number of reasons. Actually, people shot them. So because the area where there was good hunting territory was being decreased because of changes of land use to agriculture and to housing, so their habitat decreased. Yeah. And also they were dying because of being electrocuted from landing on power lines and from dying from exposure to lead in the form of ammunition in bullets. If an animal was hunted and the carcass wasn't recovered, or the hunter removed the internal organs, the viscera, in order to easily transport a dead pig or deer, the condor would gladly come and eat what was left. And if it had lead fragments in it, they could get poisoned from lead. And many condors have died from that. It's still today.
Wow.
The single greatest mortality factor for wild California condors.
Around us, we have like a comeback story for bald eagles and turkey vultures and other large carnivorous birds, and a lot of their demise happened with eggshell softening from the use of DDT. Is that something that also affected the California condor?
That also affected the California condor. There was some eggshell thinning, but
sounds like a lot of stuff we humans did.
Oh yes, I mean it's a common story for endangered species. Almost 100% of them are endangered because of some form of human activity.
I can't imagine the wingspan, because when we have turkey vultures and bald eagles flying overhead in Wisconsin where we are, and that wingspan I can't imagine too much bigger than that. But you're saying this is even bigger.
Yeah, what's the mass of a regular condor?
Oh, I should know that. We're going to have to get back to you.
Well, we can look at it. I'm just trying to visualize.
5 or 8.
Compare it to a small, is it like a household dog? Is that, what kind of breed would they compare to?
You mean
a size of a dog?
Weight?
I'm trying to think of comparisons, because that's what, the kids listening might not know of mass, but they might know, like, hey, a bulldog is about the same weight or something.
Well, let's say a big cantaloupe or something like that.
Okay, sure.
Okay, yeah, because they got to be
measure.
Yeah.
Stretch out.
Well, they're all tuned in to do all that.
And stretch it out
flying.
10 feet and see how big it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hold out your arms.
Oh yeah, that's
a
good
see
point.
How close you come to 10 feet. You're not gonna come anywhere close. It's really, really big.
Yeah. Huh. Do you have to have special lab equipment for something like when you're not dealing with a living condors as much as deceased ones, or the tissue samples, correct?
Well, when they're chicks, the samples to determine sex are taken when the birds are chicks, so they're easier to handle then. Handling an adult condor requires a very skilled person to be able to grab it, so neither the person nor the condor gets hurt.
I bet.
I imagine.
Wow.
There's we think of science progressing as when you publish a paper, for instance, that the results that you might publish are replicatable. Is this something that we could see replicated, or is this we're kind of stuck with an instance in time here that just happened?
Well, the data are available for scientists to look at to see if they agree with our conclusions. But maybe more to the point of your question, this happened twice, and I would expect that it could happen again. It did. It was the circumstance that both of these chicks that were developed without a male contribution, we call them parthenotes, that both of these parthenotes were in zoo facilities. And now there are more condors in the wild than there are in the zoo facilities, which save the species by breeding their numbers up and releasing them. And still it's important to have both kinds of populations, because we want to ensure the sustainability of the population, and to do that we need to have all of the ancestral contributions, all of the ancestral genetic contributions released back into the wild. And to assure that, we need to keep a population under managed care and produce more chicks to reintroduce them back into the wild.
You mentioned that there was like a bottleneck back in the 80s where you had 22 surviving condors, and now we have a lot more. What might be the reason for parthenogenesis with a much reduced population?
Well, that's the speculation. And people have said, this could be a way for a population to rid itself of harmful genetic variation, or to or to contribute to the range expansion, to move into new habitats, because condors can fly so far. But that's really not proven. That's just an idea. But one of the things that's remarkable about this study that's going to have to be followed up by scientists that follow is that we didn't expect this, and these were birds that if we hadn't done these detailed studies, we would have thought that all of the chicks of these females were produced because there was a male contribution and a female contribution, the normal set of circumstances. And so the surprise is that no, every once in a while, a condor female can produce an egg that only has her genetic information in it, and only in a certain way, so that the chick can actually hatch. And the way we discovered this was because of the very detailed genetic profiles we keep for all California condors. The whole population, from the time that it was a population of just 22 up to now when it's more than 500. But that kind of close analysis with genetic methods hasn't really been applied to many bird populations. So birds in your neighborhood, or out in nature, I believe there's reason to suspect that it's sometimes, some proportion of the time, they may produce offspring through parthenogenesis. And that just hasn't been looked at. That's something that's really going to need to be studied more. And we're going to keep studying the California condors. And it's my hope that we'll find another one that is genetically uniform, and all of the indicators that it was produced through parthenogenesis, and we will then really focus attention on that animal and see, to allow it to make sure that it, to the best of our ability, that it grows up and breeds, and we will monitor its health in a way that wasn't done with these other parthenotes, because they were not considered especially special.
You didn't know about it till after, sometime it happened.
Right.
Is it safe to say that in what you were doing to trying to save the species, kind of unearthed the possibility that this was something that they were doing to save themselves?
That's possible. I don't think we've proven that at all. I mean, that's been suggested. It wasn't really our suggestion. It's come up as a theoretical idea, but now we're clearly in a position where we ought to look at this more closely.
Well, there's really no way to know. I think we're trying to ask why did this happen?
Right.
But we don't have a way to. I don't know how do you go about answering that question?
Well, I don't think you can. Indeed. Why? Yeah. I think the point here is that we know it happened.
Yeah. Okay.
Now the next step is to say, like, how often does this happen? Does it happen in other species? How might it happen? This is going to require more more in-depth studies of genetics as we use. It's going to require us to sequence the genomes, read out the sequence of the entire DNA, all of the DNA of individual condors, to look at the differences between ones that females that produce parthenotes with other females, or to look at the parthenotes themselves and see are there regions where they still have genetic variation, or are they really uniform? So there's some next steps to do, but we may be some time away from knowing exactly why.
Sure.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the story itself in science communication. This is a big story. Did you anticipate that it would be so big?
No, I didn't anticipate that it would be so big. I mean, I know that people like novelty. I mean, like, believe it or not, but I didn't. I think that we're a bit surprised, but I think it's a good thing for condors. It's drawing attention.
Right.
And also a good thing for people who are thinking about becoming scientists, because it's exciting work.
Yeah. I was about to say, you've got to realize that there are people that are thinking, I want to go study Parthenogenesis or California Condors because of your study here and your research.
Right. When I took my first science class, I'm afraid to say that where I grew up and everything, I didn't have a class about science until 8th grade. And when I took that class, I remember the teacher saying, now we're going to start studying plants, and plants do something that no other kind of organism can do. They actually take the energy from the sun and make it into food, into material, and that process is called photosynthesis. And I said, that's what I want to study. That's what I want to learn about. And the next week in the newspaper was a headline, "Scientists Solve Mystery of Photosynthesis." And I thought, darn it.
It's already done.
Darn it, that's what I wanted to do. Well, I've learned enough to know that they didn't actually solve all the mysteries. They uncovered another little piece of information about photosynthesis, and there's still things to learn about photosynthesis even today. But when I took my high school biology class, the first day of class, the teacher said, the field of biology is changing. It's becoming much more molecular. And I thought that's good because I liked atoms and chemistry.
Sure.
And he said, but there's a molecule, and I knew what a molecule was. There's a molecule, it's a combination of atoms. There's a molecule that's thought to be the blueprint of life, and it's called DNA. And I said, that's what I want to do. And I've been doing that ever since.
Ever since 8th grade?
When in 10th grade, I took
10th grade?
I took biology, and I said I want to work on DNA. When I went to college, I became, I was a biology major, and I studied the replication of DNA in an undergraduate research project, and I did my Ph.D. on DNA replication. And then I started studying the chromosomes of higher organisms and endangered species. So it's been DNA all the way.
Well, I suppose some people think you study condors exclusively.
No, I study many species.
No, yeah, but probably in these, this recent news story and stuff, they think maybe like, you're it's the love for animals or something like that that's driving it, but you were driven by DNA and those kind of questions?
Well, I like animals. I like animals very much, and I want to see them stick around, but it's processes of nature that produce animals and produce new species and allow them to adapt that truly is the fascination for me. And it's very exciting, and it's full of discoveries, and it's a wonderful time to be somebody who studies genetics and of all species.
This reminds me of, like, I saw this video online where someone had an apartment and they discovered an entire secret room behind their medicine cabinet. It's like you kind of done that here. It's like you and your team have found a whole new room that just starts a whole new, some more exploring, and it just leads to more and more exploring.
Scientists,
that kind of gets my heart going here.
Yeah. Well, scientists do that. You see, this is, you watch how things, one watches, or information is accumulated about how things take place. And, some of the really interesting things is when something doesn't make sense.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Then you have to say, maybe it doesn't work the way we thought. What kind of framework, what kind of way of thinking about this would have this make sense? And, that's how scientific discoveries are made. And it's a very intriguing, engaging, and rewarding process.
Are you ready for the science fame that you have earned from this?
I don't think that, I'm not too concerned about going out and walking down the street or anything. I think that the greater thing is going to be that people are going to think about condors and the way that animals reproduce and change. And I don't think I'm going to be very famous because of this, maybe as a footnote, but.
Well, I think of, as Dale mentioned this, I remember the story about this extra room in someone's apartment, but I was thinking specifically of when I was in college, the news came out about the cloning of Dolly the sheep, and that just basically amplified and energized the whole field. And we've seen a lot of changes there since. And I would dare say almost any textbook since then has had a mention of that as kind of like a novelty there. And when we talk about science curriculum right now, or science standards, one of the pieces that comes up is a phenomenon, and something that you find like, oh, that's interesting, and then you go into study that. And I do think that this is, obviously you had this phenomenon, and then you went and investigated it a little bit more. But this is almost like I think this could be, like you said, a turning point for some people to say, yeah, I want to take this and go down the road with this. Maybe looking into this possibility in other species or within. There's got to be some condor reproduction specialist going, well, that just I don't know as much as I used to the other day.
Well, right. Well, I just met with some of happened to meet with some of the animal wildlife care specialists who take care of California condors, and they'd all been reading this paper.
Yeah. Were they surprised by these results?
Well, everybody is.
Yeah.
Brian, as a biology teacher, would you think you would start a unit with this story? Because you could kind of start with the novelty of it and then kind of work into the way we expected things to pan out.
I like the science story behind it. The fact that it was not something you were looking for. The data showed you something that made you take a second look at it and think about it. And then you went back and, like you said, you first thought this can't be right. And you go back to it, and then you had the tools, you had the samples to back up your claim that way. And I think this is a grand documentation of how science actually happens. And as you mentioned, this is going to open up the doors for a lot of other things that we'll see. And we may have a scientist in the field right now, or a student who wants to be a scientist that's going to take up that mantle, and this story could ignite them that way.
Sure.
Well, in order to get the samples from chicks, that condor chicks, in order to identify their sex, and also condor chicks need to be vaccinated against West Nile virus, because condor chicks that aren't vaccinated against West Nile virus have died of the disease. And so sometimes, many times, when it's possible, people use mountain climbing skills to come to California condor nests and vaccinate the condor chick. They can tell from the behavior of the parents when about when the right time is, and vaccinate the condor chick, and to take a blood sample to check its lead levels, and to identify its sex. And we get that sample to identify its sex, and then we can determine the parentage. But I just wonder now if these really brave and skillful people, as they're looking at these chicks, if they think like, I wonder if it could be a parthenote.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I was thinking that must be quite the LinkedIn profile, that I climb mountains.
What a story to tell, yeah.
Vaccinate and collect tissue samples from California condors. But yeah, I think there's definitely going to have some. I was thinking about this. I know that some of the articles and news that we've seen have detailed this as like a virgin birth. But this feels more like nature's way of cloning.
Well, I'm sort of glad you asked me, because in animals that have eggs, we don't talk about births. We talk about hatches. And as far as virgin, well, both of the females that produced eggs that developed into parthenote chicks had reproduced with males multiple times. So they were not inexperienced sexually.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not big on the use of virgin birth.
Have you seen the public translate this to humans right away? Like, try to make can this happen with humans and that kind of stuff?
Well, it really can't because of, it involves talking about the profound differences in early embryonic development between mammals and other vertebrates because of a phenomenon called imprinting, where there are genetic changes that are added onto the DNA of animals as they're going through gametogenesis, as they're making the reproductive cells that will, produce a next generation. And in mammals, there needs to be a paternal contribution, not necessarily a Y chromosome to make a male, but there still has to be a male contribution in order to have successful embryonic development.
Yeah. Has that question been coming up, though?
Not so much, but
okay.
Some people have asked, can this happen in mammals? And I start to explain it and they ask a different question.
Yeah. I always just think that a lot of times, stories like this in nature are quickly like, well, okay, what if this was people? They kind of make that parallel and then it's like, well, a whole different ballgame.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to differentiate, but of course, people are people, and social media is having a good time with this.
Well, maybe we'll breed the next. I didn't use that term intentionally, but maybe we'll find the next science fiction writer getting a story in their head from this as well.
Yeah, could be.
Well, I was thinking we could get a collection of scientifically accurate memes about the story.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's beyond my strength and life.
Brian, let's get on that. Let's start making
Condor memes.
The Condor's just standing there. Well, actually, I've had other partners.
On that note, Dr. Ryder, we've lost Dale, but thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you talking to us, and we are excited to see this discovery and what it means for you and your team moving forward.
Well, thanks a lot. It's been nice talking to you, and we'd love to get a link when you post it.
Absolutely. You bet. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Lab Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about some of the things discussed in this episode or previous episodes, you can find show notes at our website, laboutloud.com. If you have a guest idea or a future topic that you'd like to see on Lab Out Loud, go to our contact page and send us a message. Also, you can subscribe to Lab Out Loud on your favorite podcasting app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to find podcasts. While you're there, leave us a review and rating. Your input helps others find our show. Thanks again for listening.